Hey, what is going on, guys? RVZ Stealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best top laners for Season 5, Patch 5.10. So first up on my list, I have Hecarim. Hecarim, in my opinion, is a really good pick because he's just got really strong pick potential with his ultimate and his E, and he's got really good mobility with his E as well. He's also got solid CC with his ultimate and his E, and he can run Ignite as well, which makes him a really good laner. And once you do hit level 6 as Hecarim and you pick up the Sheen on him, the damage that he can do is actually really good, and you can just go for all-ins when you're playing as Hecarim as long as you're in a favorable matchup, because the chance of you winning that all-in are very high when you are running the Ignite. He's also got a great mid-game power spike because he picks up the Trinity Force, and then once he does pick up that item, the damage that you get is really good. And he's also got pretty good sustain in lane due to his W. His TP ganks are also really strong. If you can pick up home guards on Hecarim and then get a TP gank down bot lane, you're at least guaranteed to blow the enemy summoners, if not pick up a kill. Some cons to Hecarim are he is pretty mana hungry in the early game, so I would definitely recommend starting Crystalline Flask unless you are in a really easy matchup where you can kill your opponents in the first few levels. And he is also quite weak if you do fall behind with him because he's an all-in champion, and if you do fall behind and you do go for an all-in, then you're probably just going to get blown up right away because he's not going to have the health stats, he's not going to have those tank stats that he needs to have when diving into the backline with his ultimate. So next up on my list, I have Vladimir. Vladimir, in my opinion, is a very good pick in this meta because he does sustain damage, and therefore he can just get a load of damage off in teamfights to the tanks and just chunk them down because of his Q and his E. He's also got great sustain in lane with his Q, and he's pretty hard to gank as well because of his W. Unless you're pushed all the way up into the enemy's tower, it's going to be really hard to gank a Vladimir because if his flash is up and his W is up, he's basically going to get away every single time. He's also a great team fighter due to his strong AoE damage, and he's also ranged, so in the laning phase he has a pretty easy time. He's also got a great late game, and his level 9 power spike is really strong as well because at level 9 you get your Q maxed out, and then your Q is on like a 2 or 3 second cooldown, so you're just going to be able to spam that out and just deal a ton of damage and sustain a lot of health as well. He's also super hard to kill because of his W, and you usually end up picking up Zhonya's on Vladimir, so it's just really hard to kill him in teamfights. Some cons to Vladimir are he is weaker in the early game, so if you're playing against a Vladimir, if he uses his Q to CS or something, then try to be a little bit aggressive on him because his Q is on like an 8 or 9 second cooldown, probably even higher than that in the early game, so you do want to make sure that you're taking advantage of Vladimir's high cooldown spells in the early game, and he also does not have a gap closer. Next up on my list, I have Echo. So Echo's being banned in pretty much every single game right now, but if he's not banned, then I definitely would recommend you picking him up either in the top lane or the mid lane because in my opinion, I just think he's a really strong pick right now. He's a great laner because the damage coming out of his passive along with his Q and his E is just really good in the laning phase, and if you can get a good W off, you're basically guaranteed to win the trade every single time. He's super slippery as well due to his ultimate and his E, and he's got great burst as well. He's also got pretty good mobility with his E, and his passive is also really strong. It just deals a ton of damage, and it just makes him a really good bursty champion. He's also got an insane ultimate, and you can just use this in so many situations. If you get caught out, you can just use it to back out of the sticky situation, and you can also just use it to deal a ton of damage as well. He's also got the shield on his W, which is really nice, and it just allows him to jump in and get that shield and be able to soak some damage and then burst down his opponent and then jump out with his ultimate. He's also got pretty solid CC with his Q and his W, and his W is very rewarding if you can land it. Some cons to Echo though are his W can be hard to land because it does have quite a long delay on it. I'm pretty sure it's a 3 second delay, so you do have to make sure that you're placing it in the right location in order for you to land it. And he is also pretty squishy as well, so if your jungler isn't a tank and your support isn't a tank, then picking Echo might not be the best idea, because if your team is a full squishy team and it goes to late game, then you're probably not going to end up winning that game. Next up on my list, I have Rise. So you guys might be a little bit surprised about this pick, but I do think that Rise is a pretty good pick right now after the changes he got this patch. So his ultimate's duration is now up to 6 seconds, which makes his level 6 power spike really good, and it just allows him to deal a ton more damage. And his passive's duration also got increased, so these changes to Rise I think are just really good, and it's going to make him a much stronger pick right now. His Q also did get a little bit of a damage buff to it as well, so overall some really nice changes to Rise this patch. He's got a really strong late game, and if you can get to that late game as Rise, like the tankiness that he has and the damage that he has is just really good. He's also got sustained damage, which makes him a really good pick in this meta, and he's got low cooldown abilities as well. He's also a tanky mage, so he can just soak a ton of damage in teamfights compared to someone like an Echo, where Echo's going to deal a ton of damage, but he's not going to be able to soak a lot, whereas Rise, he can deal quite a bit of damage as well, and he can also soak quite a bit. He's ranged as well, so this makes him a pretty solid laner, and he's got a very strong level 6, like I said. He's also super easy to play because he does, I guess his Q is a skill shot now, but his E and his W aren't hard to land, and as long as you can land your Q, then he's a pretty easy pick. A few cons to Rise are, if you do fall behind in the early game, it's going to be really hard to come back with him. So if you are pushing out in lane, then make sure that you are placing a ward down, because if you do end up getting killed in the early game, it's just going to be really hard to come back, because Rise is a scaling champion, and if you aren't stacking your tier and you aren't getting that CS to work your way up to the Rod of Ages, then your power spike is going to be really late, and it kind of makes him useless because he does need his items to be effective. And he is also somewhat mana hungry in the early game, so picking up a crystalline flask will just allow you to sustain that early game, and it will also allow you to stack your tier a lot faster because you're going to be able to sustain your mana pool with the crystalline flask. So number 1 on my list for patch 5.10 is Irelia. Pros to Irelia are she's a very strong duelist because of the potential 2-second stun as well as the true damage, and once you do get the Sheen on Irelia, the damage coming out of her is really strong because you're going to be getting the Sheen procs from your ultimate and all of your other abilities as well, so I just think she's a really good duelist because of that. She's also got a great mid-game power spike. Once you pick up the Trinity Force on Irelia, you start to deal a ton of damage, and as long as you don't feed your enemy kills in the laning phase, just wait till you do get that Sheen or you do get that Trinity Force and then go for an all-in, and the chances of you winning that all-in are going to be very high. She's got true damage on her W as well as sustain on her W, which makes her a very good laner, and she's got a great level 6 like I said before. She's also got the gap closer on her Q, which she can use it in many situations. She can use it to last hit minions, and she can also use it to hop to a low health minion and then hop to her opponent, which is what I like to do to just surprise my opponents in certain situations. And she's also got pretty solid wave clear with her ultimate. And I never like to build more than 2 AD items on Irelia because the damage that you get from the Trinity Force is already really good. And if I am really far ahead, then I might build a Blade of the Ruined King, but that's it because the damage that you get from those items is really good. And then I just go full tank after that, and you can just soak a load of damage in teamfights while doing a ton of damage as well. Some cons to Irelia are she does have a weaker early game, and she is also quite mana hungry in the early game, so I would definitely recommend picking up the Crystalline Flask so you can sustain that early game. First up on the honorable mentions, I have Riven. So Riven is a pretty good pick. She's got a little bit of a weaker early game against some of the ranged top laners, but if you can get ahead in the early game and get that first kill, then she just snowballs really hard, which makes her a pretty good pick. Next up I have Chogath. So Chogath is also a pretty good mid laner, and if you can't play him mid for some reason, then top lane Chogath is also pretty good. He's got really strong burst damage with his full combo, and his CC is also really strong coming out of his Q and his W, so if you're looking for a tanky mage, then Chogath is also a pretty good pick along with Rise. Next I have Wukong. In my opinion, Wukong is one of the strongest team fighting top laners in the game, so if you're looking for a very strong team fighter, then I would definitely recommend you pick up Wukong. His early game also isn't bad either, and he's just an overall pretty good pick right now because of the Black Cleaver getting those changes to it, so if you're looking for that team fighting top laner, then Wukong is definitely a pretty good pick. Next up I have Renekton. So with the changes to Black Cleaver, I do think that Renekton is much stronger right now. I played him a little bit recently and his laning phase is just really good and he can just bully a lot of the top laners in the game. So if you are looking for a strong laner, then I would definitely recommend picking up Renekton. Next I have Rumble. Rumble, in my opinion, he's one of the strongest team fighting top laners in the game as well. He's also a really good pick because his laning phase is pretty good. His ultimate is also game changing. You don't even need to have a strong laning phase as Rumble because if you can get a good ultimate off in a team fight, then the damage that it has and the CC that it has is just really good, and just landing one good Rumble ultimate could change the game. So if you're looking for a pretty strong laner and a good team fighter as well, then I would recommend picking up Rumble. To round out the honorable mentions, I have Gnar. Gnar is also a very strong team fighting top laner. I just like to build Black Cleaver on Gnar and then go full tank after that, and he can just soak a ton of damage in team fights while still dealing quite a bit of damage as well. So if you're looking for a strong bruiser, then Gnar is definitely a very good pick. So that is all for the video, guys. If you enjoyed, then be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you have not already. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.